Welcome everybody to the discussion on ESOPs, which are of course employee stock ownership programs. I'd like to introduce the panel. Start with Steve. A little bit about yourself, just a couple of secs.
Absolutely. Stephen Deis. Matter of fact, I'm born and raised here in Fresno. I'm actually an alumni. Got my degree in this building, 1992. I've been working with family businesses going back to the mid-90s after getting out of college. And I've been a managing director for Corporate Transition Consulting, which is our firm based out of the Bay Area. But I still live here in Fresno, so most of the customers and people that I work with are privately held family businesses between, I work with customers in Los Angeles and San Diego, but mostly here in the Valley, Bakersfield, through Modesto, Sacramento, over to the Central Coast. And it's always been a passion of mine. I come from a family business, fourth generation family business myself, in the with Sunmade and with Sunsweet, with Thompson Seedless Raisins and with Prunes with Sunsweet. So it's always been a passion of mine after having kind of lived through that process that you go through from generation to generation in the family. So it's something that I gravitated towards, and but have specialized primarily. Worked with a lot of succession and exit planning with owners. Don't have any idea where they want to go or what they want to do, but they'd like to have those discussion points. But I've had a primary emphasis in the area of ESOP specifically as a solution for owners that are looking for a way to garner liquidity for their businesses, their privately held businesses, and either exit or transition the corporation going forward. But it's a pleasure to be here. I want to say thank you to Jane and Lori and Len as well.
Thanks, Steve. Kate?
I'm Kate King, and I'm the CEO at Adco Manufacturing in Sanger. And we became an ESOP as of December 28th, 2014. So we just have finished our first 12 months as an ESOP. We are a 58-year-old family business up until that time. And I'm pleased to be here today to talk to you about our experience.
Thanks for coming, Kate. Kim?
I'm Kim Blaugher with Principal Financial Group from Boise, Idaho. So I appreciate coming here, and don't hold us against this that we're Boise. Boise State is there. I didn't go to Boise State, so but I've worked with ESOP companies for 28 years, helping them in various stages of their ESOP life, from thinking of setting up an ESOP to helping them understand where they're going with this, and then if they sell or something like that, the ESOP ends. But Principal Financial Group, we do the administration of retirement plans, both 401k, ESOP, defined benefit, and we're the leader in that, and look forward to a great discussion today.
Thank you, Kim. Sam?
Sam Geil. I'm representing Geil Enterprises. I'm chairman of the board. And in 2004, I was minding my own business and happily employed in Kansas. And my brother called me from Fresno and said, "Hey, why don't you move back and run our family business?" And I said no 6 times over the course of about 6 months. And finally at Thanksgiving, I gave up and said, "Sure, I'll come back." So in 2004, I joined Geil Enterprises here in Fresno. And my mission was to grow the equity, the value of the company, and get my 2 nephews prepared to run the business. And that mission was accomplished. And 2 years after joining the company, our cash position and our equity was so good, my brother couldn't control himself, so he decided to sell, which was a shock to me because I didn't know that he would do that. But it's his company, and that's okay. I didn't have a problem with that at all. And he had decided he wanted to do an ESOP transaction. And I knew a little bit about ESOPs because the company I had worked for before, Grundfos, out here in Clovis, had done a partial ESOP back in Europe, and I was part of the HR team that worked on that. But anyway, I really didn't know much. And I'll never forget when I met Steve, because Steve both of these gentlemen were part of our very successful transaction. And my brother says, I'm walking down the hallway and he's bopping in right? Now remember now, he's chairman, but he's gone, right? I'm running. And he says, "Hey, where are you going?" I said, "Well, oh, aren't you coming to the meeting?" And I said, "Well, what meeting?" He says, "The one with the ESOP people." I said, "What ESOP people?" "Oh yeah, the ESOP people." I said, "Oh, okay, I guess I better show up." So that's how that all started. And my two nephews and I immediately had to scramble like on an aircraft carrier and learn about ESOPs. And so we successfully purchased the company and paid off the debt this year, or actually a year and a half ago or a year ago.
Congratulations.
And very proud of that.
Very good, Sam.
100%.
Thank you, Sam.
You bet.
Appreciate it. So let's get going on our first question. Steve, could you briefly explain the history of ESOPs in the United States and why they've been a consistent merger and acquisition tool for over 40 years?
Absolutely. Most people are, when you hear an ESOP or what it is, basically what an ESOP is it's a retirement plan. It's under the same area of the retirement codes as a 401k plan. But what ESOPs have been used as, clear back to when they were initiated and started back in the late 60s, early 70s, so they've been around for a long time. It's not a new program. It's not something new to the tax code that just popped up yesterday. There's been about 250,000 ESOPs put in the United States since the late 60s, early 70s. But at any given time, there's roughly 11 to 12,000 that are actually in place at any given period of time. So what they've been utilized as for many years, and more so even now, is as a merger and acquisition tool. So it's a way for the individual owners to be able to utilize a position of selling your business to this ESOP plan, selling your equity in the business, an amount that you can choose. You don't have to go through any processes, or you don't have to sell all your business. You're half. There's not any mandate one way or the other. But the history has been that the laws have changed on an ongoing basis. So there are constantly regulation changes, things have occurred, but it's very bipartisan. If you actually look at a lot of the ESOP law that's been developed, mainly throughout the 70s, has been modified heavily in the 80s and in the 90s, even in the early 2000s, to where that you used to not be able to do an ESOP with a sub-S corporation. It used to be only C corporations. You can now do sub-S corporations for many years. And so the laws have changed to make it more attractive for business owners to look at it as a solution for their business. And why do owners look at it? Just really briefly, because of the history, is that you're garnering a lot of opportunity to be able to convert your equity in the business. You don't have to sell to a third party to do that. So it's a process you can go through where there's a lot of tax benefits and various things that we'll get into in more detail. But that's why it's been in place for so many years and bipartisan, is that it provides a way for owners to realize some tax benefits, for the management team to be able to realize some benefits as being part of the ESOP, and of course the employees for the corporation, for them to be able to participate in a retirement plan that's attractive and available to them, so that they have more for their retirement than just 401k or Social Security. And we all kind of know where things may be going to Social Security, 20, 30 years from now. So that's why there's been so much that ESOPs have evolved. They've become lucrative from that standpoint for a lot of owners and chosen by many owners. But the reason that there's been 250,000 in and only about 11 or 12,000 at any given time that are still in place is not because they just got rid of them because they didn't work out well or one way or the other. It's that it achieved its objective. And so it was used for a specific purpose at a specific time for that company. And then they were either bought by a third party, the ESOP was bought out, or they went on to other things or other solutions that went on from there.
I think you've used the phrase create a market for your company, Steve.
Correct. And that's really what you're doing, is that the government's been positive to this and provided tax benefits because they want to entice owners to be able to use this solution so that it provides a benefit onto employees as they retire.
Kim, anything to add to that?
I think that's pretty good for that one.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Steve. Good job.
Sure.
Kim, in your experience, what are the top reasons why customers have implemented ESOPs?
Well, I think, Sam and Kate here, and they can give their own opinion on this, but when we're working with owners, the biggest hurdle that they seem to have is, what am I going to do tomorrow? If I sell to a third party, what am I going to do? What's going to happen to my company? What's going to happen to my associates? What's going to happen to my legacy? And ESOPs allow you to sell the business, sell that equity position, but not change control, not change how you run the business. You don't have to do anything day two. You don't have anybody coming in to tell you how you're going to run the business the next day. So I think that's the most attractive thing. And that's what we see as being so much fun, is to watch the business owners continue in the business, to mentor the next generation, and then watch that next generation step up and take over and control the business.
Steve's done about anything
Absolutely,
to add there?
absolutely.
Great.
That's where, yeah,
Fantastic.
exactly.
So let's go to Kate and Sam. Before implementing your ESOP, what were the goals and aspirations for your company?
I think, like any business owner, it was to stay in business and continue to grow. And you spend all your time trying to improve and grow and expand your business and increase your employees' salaries and increase your product line. So you're really focused on building your business, not selling it.
Yeah, exactly right. Sam?
Yeah, and I think I'll go back to what I said earlier about my charter was to develop my two nephews and grow the value of the business. And and I think that was it. I mean,
Okay, great.
Yeah.
What was your understanding of ESOP before you actually came in contact?
limited.
Prior to implementation, limited, pre-limited?
Oh yeah,
Kate, did you
It's-
know anything about it?
it's pretty complex.
Well, I am a CPA by trade, so I knew a little, but now I know a lot. There was a lot to learn.
Well, and actually, Kate, I know you attended the ESOP Association event in Atlanta.
Yes, before
Before
we
they
just-
ever implemented?
Yeah, before we started to do it, we became members of the NCEO.
NCEO. Mhm.
And went to 2 separate conventions so that we could meet people and talk to them and understand, what experiences they had and what guidance they would have. We met a lot of people. People were very open and honest and friendly.
Wonderful.
Hey Len, let
Yes,
me
please.
add something.
Absolutely.
I don't think the important question here is what it did for our goals and aspirations per se, but the paradigm shift it created in our company. I don't, my two nephews and I had to rethink business, and we took on a whole new sustainability view of our business. Not only the economic side, but also the environmental side, the social side, and also the spiritual side. Because without operating in those 4 quadrants, I don't know that you can successfully really optimize an ESOP.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Steve, what are some of the factors to explore before implementation of an ESOP?
I'd say there's many, but I think, and Kate and Sam echoed it in their comments, education is critical for anything that you're looking to do with your business. Knowing what all your options are, having the ability to garner as much information that you can have available to you. You obviously want to have some people that have an understanding of it. In other words, people that are practitioners that are involved with the implementation of ESOPs. You want to talk with other owners that have implemented ESOPs. What went well, what didn't go well, what pitfalls were there, because there are. Just like in any transaction that you can do, you have to go through that process of understanding what were other people's experiences. And I think that's how we learn the most is by example. And people that we trust, people that we understand. You want to have people that you have trust in, that you have confidence in, that are competent, to understand what you're dealing with as a business individually, not just that, some people think ESOPs, it's just kind of a cookie cutter installation. I know Kim can echo this, is that it can be designed in so many different ways. That's actually a bit of that double-edged sword a little bit when it comes to an ESOP, is that there's so much flexibility that's involved with an ESOP and how you can design it. That makes it even a little bit more difficult because there's more than just one option to how to put it together. It's not, here's the piece of paper and it's white on both sides and it has writing on it and that's all there is. There's really a blank sheet of paper but with parameters. So what I always tell people that's important to them, and in Len's question, is get as much education as you can about all your options, get as much education about if you gravitate toward an ESOP, find out as much as you can, and involve your practitioners, involve your attorney, involve your CPA, involve your financial planners, your wealth managers, your banker, which will be pivotal to the transaction. Involve all those people because they're each going to have experiences of things that they've dealt with, and then make sure that it's collaborative. Make sure that everyone that's involved in the transaction is understanding what the goals are. What I find can be difficult is when people go in one direction or another and they're not talking with all the practitioners, aren't discussing what's involved and discussing that with the owner and the owner's management people within the company, key management. That's where things can go awry. You want to have the transaction done as in the highest quality possible, but here again, education is critical on the front end.
Any
It's
other
critical.
factors, Ken?
I think that, no.
I think Steve's point too is that it can sound intimidating, Kim, but there are ways to simplify the process for the client.
I mean, as Steve stated, you want to have people that you trust that are helping you come to an understanding of what your alternatives are. An ESOP is just one quiver for ownership transition. It shouldn't be. You shouldn't have somebody trying to sell you in doing an ESOP. They should be helping you understand all the alternatives for ownership transition, and then understand if the ESOP fits into your goals and objectives. And if it does, then move down the road. But don't buy the sexy things of the tax savings and the as the reason to do an ESOP. It needs to be a cultural thing, a full breadth of understanding of why you're doing an
Similar
ESOP.
to what Sam says, more of the 4 quadrants.
You don't want to sell your business to an ESOP and then stick your management team and the successors with something that isn't going to fit. That's not good.
Yeah, and
And I know Sam and his
yeah,
group did.
and one of the things that we experienced that we had that we really had no idea what would happen is we lost our CFO over it. It didn't fit his personal financial model.
Okay.
And I remember sitting down with him, and it wasn't, a negative or an egregious kind of conversation. It was just, this isn't why I came here. He wanted, a different wealth package, right? And he saw himself being limited in an ESOP environment. So be prepared. You'll be surprised who might just jump ship because it doesn't fit their personal financial objectives, right? And we ended up hiring somebody where it fit. And there was nothing wrong with that. It was just, it can happen.
So that sort of segues, Kim, in your experience, you've done plans. What type of pre-ESOP ownership culture was present in your most successful ESOP ventures?
It's definitely often a more family type atmosphere where the owners feel that their family is in part their employees, their associates, and but ESOPs are not limited to just small businesses. There are ESOPs with 15,000 employees. I think you guys have Wincos here. They have more than, well, they have 15,000 employees, so they have a lot of employees. So it fits into a lot of different modes, but a culture where people can feel empowered to do their job. They can, an ESOP, to me, gives that scoreboard. An ESOP is not the culture of the company. But an ESOP allows employees to come to work every day and realize that stock value they see up on the, that stock value they get to look at is their reward for doing a good job. It's theirs to the extent it's owned by the ESOP. So having a culture that allows employees to be empowered and move forward and embrace that, and again, bring in that management team, getting the management team involved and having that successor management team there. Companies you know, if you have a company and there's uncertainty about where that ownership's going in the future, all your management team, all your employees have angst about that. And when you're going out and trying to hire people and bring them in, I think that is also an impediment to it. But once people understand it's an ESOP company, then they know the ownership, when they get to understand it, is settled, hopefully for a period of time. So,
Thank you so much, Ken. Kate, what other types of perpetuation or exit planning options had you considered prior to implementation of the ESOP? What was the look at the company in terms of succession before you looked into the ESOP?
Well, we looked at everything, and Kim made a good point that your management team looks at you and they know how old you are, and they're starting to think about it. Oh, maybe how many more years do you think they'll stay, and what do you think they'll do, and will they sell to some outsider? So they, I had a management team, in fact, because I'm the youngest at 58 and the oldest was 65. They were kind of getting freaked out. And so, I started hearing from employees, what are you going to do? I mean, they started asking me, they started getting really bold about it. Are you going to sell to an outside party? And if you do, what about me? What's my, So everybody was really trying, in a family business, because it is a family business, your employees, kind of overstep that boundary sometimes. So we looked at outside companies, we looked at our industry, the mergers and acquisitions that were taking place, and we just didn't like any of those solutions. And truthfully, our CPA came to us and said, listen, I've been hearing about ESOPs, I've been working with a couple people who are doing it, and I think you should listen to this as an option. So we did, and for us, it appeared to be a better avenue for us to drive down, and in the end we did. But we looked at everything. We looked at merging with we looked at buying other companies to maybe even get bigger before we could sell. So we were kind of looking at the broad spectrum.
Thank you. Sam, how about your place?
No, it was like I said, it was surprise.
Okay.
One day I walked in and I was having a meeting with Steve and Joe. And that's okay. I'm not saying that was bad per se, but we had to scramble then. It was just, the dynamics really changed. And I think you also need to understand that not all family businesses are the same. Now, and I'm sure Kate would agree, I had my brother and sister-in-law working in the company, owning it, with two sons. That's not the same as a brother and a sister, or just the mother, or you know what I'm saying? The dynamics are really, really unique, like a thumbprint in these family businesses, and you have to treat them like that. And I think that's an important factor. But did we think about doing something else? No, because I think the husband and wife, my brother and sister-in-law, had a plan, and they thought the best plan was to exit.
And this was their way of exiting.
Yeah, and that my brother had already done the homework,
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to me and my nephews, which was okay, because we still had time to come up to speed. But that set into motion some things with the folks that were left behind, myself and my two nephews, that made it really interesting. And so one of the unique things we did was we didn't do 100% ESOP, we did a 91%. Then Ryan, Jason, and myself retained the other 9%. Okay, because there was fear.
Yeah.
There was fear that we were, we were losing control. All right, because we didn't want to lose control. And as it turned out, we would have preferred 100%, but we just didn't know at the time. So instead of feeling really risky and going 100%, well, let's be conservative and do 91, and we still have 9%. So if we retired our shares, we could take back control of the company because we have the other 9%. But the more we learned, then we realized, no, it ought to be 100%. So let's sell our shares back to the company. Now it's 100% ESOP. Yeah. So
So how did the daily operations change, if at all, when you implemented the ESOP? Was day-to-day the same, or did you find any significant differences in
I
operations?
mean, we still ran the business, but one of the things we did was I had to dictate to help change the culture that we were no longer a family business, and that was tough. I don't think my brother and sister really liked that too much, but I really had to do what I had to do, which was to get everybody shifted over from the family business mentality and concept over to the employee side. And I couldn't do that gently. I couldn't just, one bite of the elephant at a time, because that wasn't going to work.
No.
Emotionally, for the sellers, it had to be all or nothing, right? And so I used that kind of flag, all right, to say, okay, we're picking up this flag now and we're marching that way, and so I had a little mantra: you believe or leave. Believe or leave was the mantra. If you don't believe in what we're doing, there's the door, because we don't have time. We don't have time for, to carry the weak and wounded. That was a hard message, especially when the family culture was help everybody be, and I had to do that in a way that wasn't too, aggressive, It was an interesting time.
Guess
So
so.
we still ran the business. We got through the 08, 09, 010, did the ESOP, did an acquisition, and still ran the business, and it worked.
Wonderful. Kate, how about did your daily operations change much?
Our culture and our daily operation has not changed as of this time, and we're still pretty young. Our employees really still do not understand that they are owners.
Yeah.
And as Sam said, this is an educational process that will take time for our employees. They say things to me all the time, to the effect of, well, it's your company, you can do what you want. Well, no, it's not. I don't own any shares anymore, so it isn't. I'm just the CEO now. I'm running the company, but it's been business as usual, and I'm going to have the same struggle getting them to understand this is yours now, and you have to start treating it like it's yours, like I always have. So it's a process, I'm certain.
Which is one of your goals. You may want to comment on that, Steve?
And to echo that, the process that all the customers that I've worked with in the time that I've been involved with ESOPs is it's going to be a process. The main thing for the owners that are exiting is control. In other words, do I maintain control of what's going on? What the owners tell the employees is purely up to them. There's only a requirement in an ESOP that they get an annual statement, and Kim can correct me if I'm wrong. They'll get an annual statement, with the number of shares they have and the value. In other words, really that's all you're really obligated to let them know of what's going on. You're not giving over financial statements to your employees. That's still, it's still private. You're keeping that through to yourself. But over time, as that evolves, Rutgers University has done some phenomenal studies. There's actually literature out there under Rutgers University where they've looked at productivity. They've looked at, does it enhance productivity that the owners believe that they have an ownership culture now in their business? The employees,
Yeah.
exactly. And so how do they treat the business differently? We had an ESOP we did for a company over by the airport here years and years ago. They were a contractor. And the dynamic was, do we go back and pick up the nails off the ground after a job, or do they just kind of get raked into the muck with everything else on a commercial project? If we leave the lid off of a large vat of industrial glue or paint or anything, and it spoils and it goes bad, and that was a $100 item or a $200 item, wasting that now all of a sudden became a financial impact to them. And it might have only been their relative piece of the ESOP, their one employee of 50 or 100 or 1,000, but you start having initiatives. You start looking at, how do I think differently as an owner? In other words, I love my job. I work for the company I work for. I get paid my salary. I have benefits. But when all of a sudden now you're what they call a beneficial owner, you don't have a stock certificate that says I own X amount of shares and I vote those shares. You're a beneficial owner. So you're going to have, it's a different perspective that they're going to look at in the business. And what you hope is they start thinking like owners in terms of productivity gains that can even make your company more productive as you go forward, a better company than it was before, and more of a perpetuation of that business. Because we all know, as been involved with privately held businesses, first generation's tough, second generation's tougher, third generation's really tough, and fourth generation can be impossible unless you're the Betts company, Bet Springs. Well, then they're off into even more than that. But just to echo that, it gets to those employees. It gets to that they have an understanding, and it's a culture that they become part of, and I think an important one.
Lynn, I think one thing
Go
I want to clarify is to make sure that we're not thinking that the employees truly do own the company, that this is that somehow an ESOP business is different than any other business that's out there. Businesses have boards of directors. Boards of directors set the strategy for the plan. They hire the officers, they appoint the officers, and they execute the plan. An ESOP is the shareholder. And the ESOP is a trust with a trustee that is the shareholder. And therefore, they get to vote for the board of directors. That's all a shareholder does. A shareholder really doesn't have power in the day-to-day operations of the business. Obviously, shareholders are going to let Sam run off and do something crazy and open a ski resort on a mountain over there. But maybe they would. So an ESOP company is run the same way. Correct, as Sam stated. When you're a family business and you want to make a distribution to yourself and a big dividend, you do it.
Okay.
When you're an ESOP company, or you want to give yourself a big raise and pay yourself a big salary because you want to pay a big tax bill, you do that. With an ESOP company, you have to run it more as a business, as under best corporate governances. So that's what changes, and that's positive, or it can be negative.
Yeah.
And with Geil Enterprises and hope with Kate's business, I'm sure, it'll be very positive.
Yeah, and I think it's only negative if the sellers don't really understand what they're doing. You know what I'm saying? If the sellers just remain ignorant about it and I'll just say it, are greedy and just want their money, and they don't really put any time into what is going on here, I could see where it could go bad.
I've seen
But,
situations
Yeah, I'm sure you have.
where the owner still thought they owned it.
Oh, yeah.
And as you
Well,
say, Kate, they don't.
We had a board meeting, right, where in our bylaws, we had to bring on 2 external board members. Before, we didn't have any external board members. But when we did the ESOP, we had 2 external board members. So the board was myself, 2 nephews, my brother Steve, who was chairman, and these 2 external board members. And so we got into a little, debate about a decision. And my brother says, well, I'm an independent board member. And we looked at it. You didn't read the bylaws, did you? You didn't read the definition of what an independent external board member is. And it ain't you, brother. Your last name is Geil. You benefited from the sale of the ESOP. There's nothing external or independent about you. Those are the only 2 external board members in the room, and they're making the decision. Not me, not the 2 nephews, and not you. So, you know what I'm saying? It's the sellers have a mind shift, paradigm change. And they have to be prepared for that. Because in an ESOP, the power on the board is not the remaining family members. It's the external board members, the independent board members, because then there's no conflict of interest, right? Because if you get audited by the DOL or IRS, they're going to look for stuff like that. So that's why you have the independent board members. Well, that was a big shift for my brother, because he was used to having all the control
And that needs to be.
and getting his way.
The shareholder, you as a shareholder need to understand that
Yeah.
going into this, that you're selling the business and it's
Yeah.
going to be, you're not going to necessarily be able to run as you did, or maybe it will. Maybe you know, but there will be things that will be different.
Well, I think it depends how you ran it before as well.
Right.
And
Sure.
I had partners, and I inherited my shares from my parents, so I never treated it like I was the founder. It's completely different.
Yeah.
That's
So I always
another
treated
aspect.
it like it was a publicly traded company
Yeah.
or whatever, with scrutiny on everything I did. Now I do realize, and so do the other shareholders, it is not business as usual from that standpoint. We have to live with a different set of rules, period. And it's a higher standard, I think. Not that we ever did anything that we shouldn't have, but
That's a
we
good-
would never.
A good higher standard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There's more scrutiny.
We didn't change the values of our
Not at
company.
all.
I mean, they were just like they were when it was a family business.
Yep.
In fact, if we did anything, we enhanced it because there was one word that we really never used before, and that was transparency.
Yes.
And an ESOP really, really has an opportunity to create a transparent work environment. So if anything, it just made the values better, didn't make it worse.
Yes.
Kim, I think you had-
It's the transition you go through.
Yeah. You had mentioned before, it's not just about the money and the taxes.
No. No. You know, as you can see here, they went through they're going through a process and went through a process where you kind of had to come to realization. You know, it's about the culture.
Yeah.
And when we talk to business owners, and I'm sure, you know, you have more experience in this, that you know, the toughest thing is not, I mean, I'm a CPA by background, so when I look at an ESOP and all the tax savings and what it brings, it's like, you know, I get with the CFO at the company and they're like, let's get it done. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but it's everything beyond that. It's the feelings of the owner and what's going to happen, how it's going to work. The fear of, oh my gosh, I just sold 100% to the ESOP. Something's going to happen. I mean, there's going to be I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be a vacuum or something. But you know, everybody's scared of that because when we start talking to owners, they're like, oh no, let's do a 30% transaction, or maybe we'll just contribute some stock because we kind of are too scared to jump into it. But and I understand that, and that's the fear, and it's a real fear. I mean, it is.
Right.
Now, there's a couple of points I want to make.
Go right ahead.
That are associated with this. Okay, so we did our transaction in '06. We've had 10 straight years of profit. We've had 10 straight years of dividends. So there's performance. Those are facts. It's not fiction. We got through '08, '09, '10, or '10. And I think the ESOP was a big part of that. But when we talk about the execution part of an ESOP, right? I think it's really, really incumbent upon the owners, the sellers, to get educated on the nuts and bolts as much as they can handle. Like Kate came from a financial background, so some of those nuts and bolts would be really a lot easier than me. I came from a human resource background. So the easy part for me was the HR side, the communication, you know, getting people to feel good about it. For her, you know, it'd be the nuts and bolts of the transaction, the numbers and all that, where I struggled, right? Then finance. So the nuts and bolts, but finance. So I had to become a finance person, right? And then board governance, really important because that changes. And a funny thing happened. I went to a board governance program at Kellogg School back in Northwestern. And there were, I did a little Q&A, and I raised my hand, you know, and I'm from Fresno. And what's the unique aspects of board governance with an ESOP? Now, these are the best of the best, right? How do you spell that? Yeah, okay, never mind. You know, and this was a top-flight board governance program for a week and a half. And the ESOP confused them. But they were not prepared for that question at all. The other is change. So pre-execution would be, you know, learn the nuts and bolts. You got to have financial acumen to get into this. You may not be a financial person by training, but you got to have a financial acumen. Board governance, and then prepare for change. Those would be the 4 things.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
That's great. Kim, how would you contrast and compare the use of an ESOP as a merger and acquisition tool versus sale to an outside third party?
Again, I'd go back to the ability to retain control, to be able to settle your equity position as one step, and then decide your future in the management of the company and running the company as a second, totally separate issue. When you sell to a third party, they're going to dictate your future. When you sell to an ESOP, it doesn't really change. Generally, they kind of no, they didn't run, but not at all. So it's that ability to continue that business, have the legacy go on. My father was a small business owner in Marion, Indiana, and he was going to sell the business, and I went to him and said, I do ESOPs. I could help you with this. It'd be cool. All that education you paid for, it'd be great. And it would have been a great thing, except he had no management team, which was kind of a little bit important in this. You need a successor management team. So, and he sold to a third party, and the business changed, and he was out in 2 years, and I think he regretted not being able to come back to it was a dealership, and being able to do that and continue on. So it was the loss of going into retirement and enjoying life on a different perspective, being able to settle that liability of your business going bankrupt at one day, and just being able to come in and enjoy what you've developed.
So
Yeah, and we have two examples. Well, we have three or four, right now, that probably two that you're pretty aware of. Lakos, Claude Laval's company.
Oh, yeah, Claude.
Okay, they sold to Lindsay. That company's not the same. It's not going to be the same.
Yeah.
Okay, and watch the news and see what happens to that company. Pelco sold to Schneider out of France. Watch the news. Watch what happens to that company. It won't be the same. Dave McDonald will never be able to go back there, and Claude will never be able to go back to Lakos. But my brother and I can go back into our company, and you'll be able to go back to yours.
Yeah.
One of the real powerful economic advantages of an ESOP is the company gets anchored in the community. It ain't going anywhere.
Well, a good friend of ours
It's not going anywhere.
in the ESOP community, he keeps saying the Chamber of Commerce is worried that he's in a really small town, he's a business in that town, and the Chamber of Commerce keeps buttering him up and inviting him to things, and he's like, they think I'm going to move the business. We'll go offshore, do whatever. It's like, there's no way we could do it. If we move the business, we'd have to fire all of our employees, buy all the stock back, and we can't afford that. So we can't leave there, but I'm not going to tell the Chamber of Commerce that. I got to enjoy this.
Great, okay.
And I'll bet you if
Right.
Claude Laval, and I don't know about Dave, but if we could have gotten a team in front of Dave and said, look, man, you know what?
It's a different way.
What are you all about? What's your legacy? They may have changed that decision. They may have gone this route, or something
Sure.
like this.
Sure.
Because, and that's a sad commentary, I believe, in our system, in our society, that we don't think out beyond ourselves
it through.
sometimes. You know what I mean?
Through.
Yeah.
Steve, hope you don't mind me taking a tangent on you.
Sure.
With this. I don't want to surprise you or anything, but I know that this control keeps coming up.
Mhm.
And I think you've had some experience with companies that have done ESOPs many years ago where they were able to pass control to the next generation through the use of an ESOP.
Mhm.
Would you mind expounding on that for us?
Absolutely. One of the big areas that's important for, well, if not all, but for most business owners, is ESOPs are used whether you can want to perpetuate that to your next generation of management. You may not have any sons or daughters or nieces, nephews in the business or grandchildren. But the other methodology is where you do have family in the business. You have those sons, you've got that close-knit family that's there in the business. So you want to find a way, well, how do I go about maintaining, here again, like Sam mentioned and Kate mentioned, that culture going forward in my business where I'm still here and present, that I can do that, where I can not only pass on the values of the business and the legacy of the business on an ongoing basis, but I can financially pass on the business to next generation as well. And with an ESOP, when you sell, you obviously the current shareholders are garnering liquidity, they're getting cash for their equity, and they're going to get some portion up front. They'll get some over time, and they'll garner that for themselves. There'll also be a transition of ownership to your employees. There's vesting schedules, just like a 401k plan. You're going to have vesting schedules. They've got to be here for a period of time. You don't want an employee to show up tomorrow fully vested and has ESOP shares and then they leave the next day. You want it to be motivating to them. You want that to be there for them as they go forward and they become an integral part of your business. But and we'll get into this a little bit further, but there are ways that you can also financially transition the business to not only to your employees over time, but as you're doing that, as your employees retire, leave, go on to other things that they're doing, you can actually transition the equity that you sold to your next generation of family. So it's a way to not only, most people think of a transaction you sell to a third party, it was a liquidity event one time, and that's it, which is phenomenal. I mean, that's a great solution. PricewaterhouseCoopers did a study years ago. 50% of owners, their first inclination is I'm selling to a third party. ESOPs were 7% in that dynamic. About 15% were sell to family members. Another portion was management, sell to management, that type of dynamic. You can use an ESOP to sell to next generation without them having to come up with the cash to do it. Employees don't put money into the ESOP. People think, well, the employees are buying the company. Employees aren't putting money into the ESOP. They're not taking their dollars and buying the company. And so the same way that you can develop strategies through this to not only have a one-time in a family liquidity event, but a generational liquidity event. So the next generation 20 years from now can actually have equity again in the business or additional equity, and they could sell to a third party or to the ESOP or whatever they may choose. So to answer Len's question, there's a lot of processes that you can go through and a lot of benefits that you can derive, but you have to understand how it fits your company specifically. And I don't know if that answers your question,
Yes,
but
thanks.
that's what
Anything
that
else on that,
entails.
guys, on that control issue? Pretty good?
I think ESOPs are not utilized in family businesses enough, because to me, it seems like a tremendous solution where that family can continue in that business and they can continue to have it, and you're not ripping the business apart by having too many people with ownership that maybe aren't part of the business. But it could really resolve a lot of issues, and there's so many businesses out there like Geil where the family's still running the business,
Yeah.
and they don't have any ownership, but they still have control and still have the input, and they're very successful businesses.
Great.
And I equate it, I'll just add real quickly, I equate it to and both Kate and Sam have mentioned, there's the transition of the business to that next generation. How do they functionally daily transition the business to generation? Then there's the financial transition. And those two have to work together really well, or you create a lot of animosity and issues within your family. So we've always hoped, and I'm a altruistic in a lot of ways. I've always hoped that this helped the process to where you have an understanding of the dynamics of your family, how to keep the business going generation to generation as you go forward, and that you use this to not only daily manage the transition to your business, but financially manage the transition at the same time, and then culturally and personality-wise as well. So we all hope that it all works together well, but we hope that the ESOPs help to provide and manifest that process.
So let's discuss then a little bit about the process of implementation of an ESOP and how the selling shareholders retain control throughout the process.
That's another thing on ESOPs, that when you sell to a third party, a lot of the process you go through is you've got outside parties making overtures to you. Most people I've run into that are owners, I've got this 3 or 4 companies that I know that are strategic parties of ours. They'll buy us. Anything happens to me, they'll buy the company. Or that's what my exit is I'll sell to a strategic party that I know. With an ESOP, you control the process, how slow it goes, how fast it goes. You're controlling the process. In other words, you're putting this together. You've got a friendly buyer. In other words, your ESOP is a friendly buyer in this process. They're not a third party that's trying to drill you down on price, do earnouts. They want to pay you a little now, and then if you don't hit your numbers, you don't get the rest. There's not a inherently initially a inherently potentially an adversarial relationship there, where depending upon how the structure of your transaction was done, did you get all your money up front? Are you getting more later? So here again, the process is education, which is critical. Before you ever spend a dime, I would get as much education as you can from people you might know, people that you get reference to that have done transactions, which there's a wealth of people here in the community that have been a part of ESOP transactions and can give this kind of information. That, I think, is the most valuable before you spend a dime to do anything. The next steps is go through a process that's stepped. In other words, it's not all at one time. You have to do it all in a hurry, and it's got to get done today, and you got to spend $100,000 the first day that you hire somebody to do it. Don't go through that process. It's incremental, as Sam had mentioned. It's incremental. So learn, go through understanding with other people, finding out as much education as you get. Then go to what your numbers are. How can an ESOP benefit my company? But start with the basics. How does it impact my balance sheet, income statement, my company financially? How does it help me? What potentially might I get out of this ESOP after tax? What do my employees get? What does my management team get? Before you ever start, go through that process. Before you ever get to a feasibility study, a lot of practitioners start at feasibility, and they'll charge a ton for it, but they start with that. They want you hooked in and starting with that investment up front. Find out where you want to go first. Learn about as much as you can before you start spending those kind of dollars through the process, through the company. And then finally, you're going to get to an implementation. Once you've gone through all of this, you've brought in the parties that are representing the ESOP, because remember, you have a seller and a buyer. The seller are the shareholders, Kate, Sam, or Steve, in the family, you've got shareholders. Those are the sellers. The buyer is an ESOP, and the ESOP is represented by, and I won't get in the weeds too much, but there's a fiduciary to make sure that it's an arm's length transaction. You're not self-dealing. Kate wanted $100 million for her company. Well, maybe not. That may not work. I'm not saying she did. I'm just saying that's as an example.
She'd have to argue with herself.
Yeah. Exactly. So you have a fiduciary. There's an appraisal done, an actual appraisal of your business, and you have an attorney that represents the ESOP. And those are people you're paying to represent, as the company, to represent the ESOP independently. So, but you control this process. You have people you're bringing in to help you through the process, and then you're going through to your closing. How is that done? You're working with your bank. Your CPA and your attorney need to be involved the whole way. Because those are the people that before I ever get there, or Kim ever gets there, or anybody ever gets there, they know your business inside out and backwards. They're the people that need to be able to decipher everything and how it applies to your business and give you that advice. And so you go through to closing, and then the work obviously that Kim and Principal does phenomenally is once you've implemented the ESOP, now how do things go thereafter? And Kate and I have had a discussion. It's different for Kate now in year one, or at the end of year one, than Sam with Geil Enterprises in year 8, 9, 10, where they're at with their ESOP. You're at a completely different points, and there's some growing pains, and there's things you go through. But you weigh those when you look at what were the other alternatives and how did we go about getting to this point. But again, you control the process all the way through to closing. You control the people that you hire to help you afterwards, help the employee group, the ESOP trust. You control that process, obviously much different than a third party. And I did leave a piece for everybody, because this question on how does it relate to selling to a third party and an ESOP. A lot of the questions that people ask are in the piece that I laid in front of you. There's basically 10 FAQs with a little clarification, and that'll help you a little bit further understand why people do an ESOP versus a third-party sale. What was their rationale?
Hey, Lynn,
Please.
This is for Kate too. What I told the employees is, everybody, this ESOP is a 401k on steroids. Okay?
Yeah.
That's it. Meeting over. Bye. That's what you need to know right now, because that's what it is. It's a retirement plan. It's got vesting. It's got a lot of elements of a 401k. So before you get all tied up in voting and I'm an owner, forget about all that right now. Just keep it real simple. ESOP, 401k on steroids. The second thing is, when Steve was talking about the buy-sell transaction. I'm gonna say it in a different way. You have the seller, who is the owners, right? Those are the shareholders. The buyer is really the management. It's not the trust, really. It's really the management, because I'm going to put people to this, right? This is not some paper thing. This is human beings, right? So seller, owner, buyer, management team. So they had to convince me as the CEO that this was a good thing to do, right? So along with the management, right, me as the CEO, who's got fiduciary responsibility and go to prison if this isn't right, right? So next to me is the Esop. And next to the Esop is a trustee. So I would say the buyers are kind of a trio of management, Esop, trust, and a trustee who's vouching for this, right? And taking responsibility for the fiduciary because the CEO doesn't know what he's doing yet, right? And is really nervous about all of this responsibility, right? And then the last point I want to make is timing. Timing, because Steve said, you can control, well, wait a minute. When we did our transaction.
Is that when you laugh?
Yeah. When we did our transaction, we were up against the calendar, remember?
Right.
Okay.
So were we.
And, and I'll tell you what, it would have been a lot more palatable if we would have timed it so that we weren't up against the calendar. Calendar meaning a fiscal year end, tax season. You got to get it in before the tax, before December 31st, that kind of thing. Because I started talking about it in October. That's when I first found out. And we had to close our transaction before December 31st. So I didn't sleep much. Okay, so, timing's important. And yes, but I say if you're going to do it on the calendar year, start everything January 1 of the year before you want to actually finalize the transaction. Does that make sense? Isn't that better?
You need to get going, yeah, you're right.
Because if you get up against the wall in terms of timing, then you're in another year, and then you've got other implications.
I agree with Steve.
Go for it.
I agree with Steve. It's a friendly negotiation as opposed to a third party who you don't know what they're thinking. It's all, they have things under the table that you don't get to know. The ESOP is all on the table. However,
that part's
it's still complex, and there's still things that got to get done, and it's still a lot of time and a lot of angst and worries and et cetera. So that's still going to happen in any transaction. Any big event like this is going to happen. So yes, get going on it and do it at a leisurely pace to the extent you can.
Right.
Well, I'd say just design it into your plan. Figure out the timing of everything, and then you can figure out how to do it on a more leisurely basis, as opposed to rush, which we did, which we benefited from. It wasn't like, I'm not saying it was a bad thing. It just created a lot more stress. Yeah. That's all.
You were trying to get it in for
that
that
you
tax
could
year.
avoid, right? That you could put your energy into something else. Yeah.
You got to run a business.
I don't know how you feel, but that's what
I have an opinion about this.
Good.
And I don't think it really matters when you start. Accountants and attorneys operate on deadlines, period. And if you give it a year, it'll be December 28th, and the bank does the same thing. The bank won't give you their answer until the last day, and the attorneys don't get anything done and the accountants don't. Nobody gets anything done unless there's a deadline, period. That's my
Very good.
I'm assuming
opinion
that
in life.
Steve and I really aren't thrown into that bag. We're
Well, those are the people that have to get all of the pieces in action, and truly they just wait. They wait for deadlines. It doesn't matter what the.
And the hard part about it is
that's an
that
amazing comment.
if you're driving the
Really
process
is.
of a transaction,
No attorneys and CPAs here, right?
I'm a CPA, and I know because that's how I live. I live
I
on
would have written
deadlines.
my contracts differently.
Yeah.
I would have had some kind of, quality clause,
and it's very true what Kate mentions. When we do
Deadline
transactions,
clauses.
we put together with Telescope. You do a whole, or not Telescope,
Gantt
but
chart.
a Gantt chart. I mean, you literally
Good luck.
have all the things that everybody has to get done and what day they have to get it done. and then you're herding squirrels.
And who's dragging?
And who's behind, who's ahead,
Right.
who's
That's
got
great.
certain things that they have to have done. The reason you get to the year ends and you start having these issues is you start looking at, okay, if we close now, that's $1 million savings. If we close after the first, well, maybe we don't get that $1 million
Don't know.
savings. So
Don't know.
there's financial reasons for doing that, but unfortunately that process does get
Yes.
truncated quite a bit when you get up to those where it's a financial financial
Great
decision.
stuff.
But I
Absolutely.
want to clarify
Please.
one thing, Lynn. We created the urgency.
Yeah.
Not
Yes.
our service provider.
Yeah.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was on us.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you for clarifying
We just
that.
had to get it done.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Yes.
and
Good
we
point.
make
They
the
had,
we
had
make
to
the
get their
dec-
money.
Well, we make the decision based on the tax year
Yeah,
too, and the
based on the
tax.
tax year.
You start thinking about this, and you're like, okay, do I want to send this money to the IRS, or do I want to really
Exactly.
put this into the employees' participant
Yeah,
accounts?
exactly.
And
Right.
let's face it, the emotional, aspect of this is that we just gave our 160 employees an opportunity to have something in retirement that they never would have had.
They never know.
That's right.
Ever in their wildest dreams, they never would have had it. So,
Well, not only that, but Steve said earlier that the rules change. So these guys are looking at impending rules for the next year. So there's another reason let's get this thing done, because the tax laws change next
change,
year. We won't be up. It's kind of like what we're going through with solar, and all the changes and everything. So we try to get it done in the favorable year, as opposed to maybe a year that would make it, financially not as advantageous. So there's those things too. It's not a service provider issue. I mean, it becomes one because they have to scramble, but the issue is really internally.
And I'll give you a quick example to make it real. We have a company here locally. Obviously, I won't mention the name. They have about 2,000 employees, so they've got quite a sizable payroll. And I can't remember the exact dollar amounts or the numbers, but literally, they're with an ESOP, just like a 401k plan. They have the ability to make a contribution to that plan in the current tax year. So let's say this was back last year, 2015. Well, literally, their profit for the year was about $5 million. Their taxable profit for 2015. Their contribution they were able to make, non-cash by the way, to the ESOP in 2015. They wouldn't implement it till this year, so you have to do a little pre-planning. They actually could adopt it. Their 25% of payroll was $6 million. So think about their tax position. Is they could make and they didn't have to make it that contribution then. I don't want to get in the weeds, but there are some end of the year decisions you have to make that they were able to make, and that they could make that in 2016. They could say, well, we don't want to do the ESOP and not ever make that contribution, but they would have the opportunity, because of some pre-planning that was done in 2015, that they might have a non-cash $6 million tax deductible item on a $5 million income. Well, what does that mean their taxes for 2015?
Gazillions.
Zero.
Yeah.
And so the decision point for them and their CPAs was, okay, well, we're obviously not going to get this done by year end. And we're like, no, you shouldn't, because you're not going to absorb it all. Well, now they're going to do it in 2016. And they have literally through till September, their extensions on their returns through September. So now they have another 9-10 months that they can go through the process. And if they choose not to do the ESOP, they spend a little money to get that piece in place. That's a sunk cost. But their opportunity cost is, well, if we feel, hey, 50-50 or more, we might go this direction. This could be our eventuality. And so you start looking at the dollars there. That little bit of pre-planning might have saved them $2.5 million.
If you one misconception we have is that you can't get fair market value when you sell to an ESOP. You're going to get less money in selling to an ESOP. Well, yeah, some strategic buyers waiting out there just to dump cash on you, and they don't care how much they pay for it. No, they want to overpay you for it. Well, yeah, that might happen, but generally buyers don't like overpaying. People do pay a strategic premium because they know that they might not get you if they pay a price. But an ESOP gets fair market value generally to a fair market value number for your business as a standalone business. But on top of that is these kind of tax planning opportunities that are there for the ESOP that actually can get taxes back for you, like, a $5 million deduction to get rid of the taxable income for a year, that now you get a refund of the S corporation, the amount you've been paying into for your tax payments on a quarterly basis. So you can add that on to what you're realizing. So don't let anybody tell you that you're not going to get value out of this.
Well, that is a misconception, isn't it?
Oh, it is, yes.
The typical market out there from a merger acquisition standpoint is the strategic buyer wants to pay as little as possible.
Sure.
I hate using the term EBITDA, but most people understand that, net income, just to be very roundabout. Strategic parties are going to pay 3 to 5 times EBITDA. Well, why are they paying that? Because they have to make a rate of return on that investment. So they're going to need to pay a little less to get that rate of return on their investment. ESOPs, if you go back 40 years, and Kim can echo this or contest it, my going back and looking at ESOPs for many, many years and my experiences in the business, it's 6 to 10 times EBITDA. What are your growth rates? I've seen them higher than 10 times EBITDA. I mean, companies with guaranteed contracts with big corporations and $100+ million valuations, I've seen it higher than that. But you're looking at 6 to 10 times EBITDA. So when you had the LBO, MBO days back in the 80s, when we're at 18%, well, an ESOP is 6 to 10. It's not as attractive as that. Or when you had irrational exuberance with a lot of purchasing of companies that were out there, we don't have the .com scenario like we have in the Bay Area here. We have brick and mortar corporations. We have corporations that are service corporations that are looking to garner value out of their business. So here again, it's in that 6 to 10 times to make it simplistic, to give people an idea of, well, what could my value be?
So your experience is that you can create more value through the ESOP as opposed to a third party.
Right, but a third party strategic, as Kim mentioned, could pay you 15 because they see that piece of your company being so integral to their business that it's worth that to them.
You look at the craft brew industry out there,
Yeah.
The craziness that's going on in that. There are several craft brew companies out there, which unfortunately we're not going to be able to drink them tonight, but think about that in the future. They're getting huge multiples, and that's because the big guys can buy this little craft brewer and take it worldwide or whatever.
Because they're losing market share on their old stuff.
Right. So they're doing it for other reasons, and so that.
That's an anomaly.
And that is.
And it's industry by industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it also tells the seller what the market will bear.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to sell it,
Yeah.
right?
That's true.
So it's good news.
I mean, if you're going to get twice as much or 3 times as much by selling to a strategic buyer, and that's what you want, and that's
If
your
that's
goal.
what you want.
That's what you should.
It's kind of hard to pass up.
Yeah.
I understand.
So Kate, having implemented an ESOP, I know we've gone over a lot already, but are there any other points, or what key points would you pass on to an ownership group who was thinking about doing an ESOP?
I don't think I would add anything that hasn't already been interjected here today. It's a process, and I'm still reeling from the whole process. We're like I said, we just passed 12 months, and we're now going through our very first fiscal year with an valuation and an audit, and it's a process that's a lot more cumbersome than anything I ever had to deal with before, because really we were debt free, so we didn't even give anything to a bank. So we never had any scrutiny. We just did an internal financial statement, and I, shared it with the shareholders, and that was the end of it.
Okay.
Now I've got bankers and insurance people and auditors and valuation people and the DOL, and I've got all these people who are scrutinizing everything, and it's painful.
Yeah.
It's painful. It doesn't come without
Some angst.
some angst. Now, would I do it again? Probably. I think I would do it again. The benefit from we've all kind of not said this, but from a tax perspective, it helped the shareholders
Sure.
dramatically.
Sure.
There's no doubt. The employees are going to benefit in ways, like I said, they never would have in their wildest dreams. And I think the company will be better for it as time goes on. I think we have to do a better job at educating our employees and getting them on board. I need the human resource aspect that Sam brought to his company. Somebody has to be the cheerleader. Somebody has to keep reminding them that this is a really great opportunity for them and a great opportunity for the company. And they've been given something that's pretty special. So,
And you mentioned that you're not quite at the point
We're-
yet of having them appreciate what that is yet.
they don't understand it yet because we have not yet provided them with their annual statement.
Okay.
That will come April 15th. They will get their first statement.
Okay.
I believe when they get that first statement and they look at that and they go, oh, wow, I've got $60,000 equity or I've got $30,000 equity, then it's going to hit home. But at this point, they don't really realize anything. They can't see anything that's different. So, we're learning.
You're getting there.
We're learning, yes.
Sam,
Wait till
you've
they see their
had
10th
more
statement.
years.
Oh, I bet.
So,
No,
Sam,
that-
tell us about your employees' reaction. Then you've had more years under your belt
I
with
mean,
it.
it's the same. They trusted us. Our employees trusted us going into this thing. So we were fortunate to have, a trusting relationship with our folks. Our industry turnover in the business we're in is somewhere between 200 and 250%. Our turnover rate was under 50%. So what does that tell you?
Yeah,
People aren't going anywhere.
right.
To a certain degree, this is a conundrum for our society because both the blues and the reds like this. I mean, what is this?
Well, Steve mentioned it's
Something's got to be
bipartisan, too.
wrong. There's a socialist piece to it, but yet there's a greed piece to it. So come on, how can this work? It works, and it's a great way to anchor your business here. To support your local community, to support your employees that work hard to make you the money that you get. And I would recommend it. I highly recommend it. And one more note. I've been involved in a lot of stuff, right? And I've been to a lot of conferences and a lot of different industries, right? And a lot of different professional conferences. The ESOP community is without a doubt the finest, most professional industry I've ever been exposed to. I've been involved with the National Center for Employee Ownership since we started the ESOP, right? It was where I went to get educated. And I have to tell you that the people that are involved in it are the cream of the crop, and I don't mean ego. I mean good people, and I never felt like I was getting bad info. People would share information. I mean, you'd have 3 or 4 competing companies there, and they're telling you all this stuff.
Sure.
They don't care. They really, there's an altruistic piece to this thing that I think threads through the whole industry.
Sure.
And there's 2 groups. There's the ESOP Association, and then there's the National Center for Employee Ownership, which is actually out of Oakland,
Okay.
which I'm very, very familiar with. In fact, I was co-founder of the California Center for Employee Ownership. That's how involved I got in it. And I don't do that for anybody, They're special people, and I really, really think that if this is something you do get into, there's so much backup, there's so much help. The providers we had were excellent. And by the way, we got audited by the Department of Labor.
Oh, you did?
Oh yeah, our ticket got picked, right?
Yeah.
And go through that one. Well, I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for our providers and our attorneys, it would have been a tough road, just getting through
Sure.
it. But man, I'll never forget the phone call I got that I made to our attorney up in San Francisco. And I said, Lynn, we got a notice from the Department of Labor. They want to audit us. She says, well, who's it from in the Department of Labor? I said, well, it's from, so-and-so. She goes, don't worry. I do the training for that person. Our attorney trains the Department of Labor on ESOPs. So that gives you a feeling of, warm and fuzzy.
Confidence, yeah.
Confidence, right? So those are the kind of people that are in this business.
I'm gonna
Right,
spin, I'm
except
gonna
for
spin,
Kim
I'm
and
gonna, I'm gonna spin, I'm gonna spin that Lynn trains the Department of Labor is we have a very collegial relationship with the Department of Labor and helping them, and they help us, and it,
Yeah.
I mean, they have their oversight, and they definitely do maybe sometimes they're doing too good a job on that, but we definitely support helping the Department of
Yeah.
Labor and being
Yeah,
allies with
what
them.
happens is some knucklehead company with an ESOP does something really stupid.
It's always
Then the
that.
Department of Labor gets tweaked over it because you're dealing with employees' retirement plans. That's the issue, right? So then, the word gets out, okay, go audit some companies,
Yeah, yeah,
So we got picked.
great.
We weren't doing anything wrong, we just got picked.
But you got through it.
We got through it, everything was fine.
That's
So
great.
Kate, if you get picked, don't
We've
worry.
been picked
Oh, you have?
Oh, you've been picked already?
Already?
within 3 months.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be over with.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Our attorney says it'll take over a year.
Oh, yeah.
But
Oh,
we
ours
didn't
took
do
2.5.
anything
Oh, sorry, Kate.
incorrect,
Then you're fine.
right?
Ours was 2.5.
Yeah, we didn't. Oh,
The
good.
DOL, the DOL.
No, no,
is-
no,
Don't
no.
let this
Wait a
scare
minute, wait a minute,
anybody
wait a
off.
minute. No, 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 no. What happened was the person doing our case went somewhere.
Yeah.
And so our file sat for almost a
Yeah.
year, and
Yeah.
nobody, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
It was okay. It's just, they have budgets, they have head count, they have to cut back, and,
Sure.
so they cut back, and the person they cut back was the person handling our case. I thought we were out of the woods a year later, said, oh, we got a new person on that case.
Okay.
Anyway.
Great, great. Steve, without getting too much into the weeds.
Sure. Which
We didn't want to make the tax and the cash benefits a dirty word here.
No.
Certainly, that's
No.
that's a great reason to be doing this. Any other tax benefits that we can talk about briefly, or
Sure.
or-
I'll keep it really simple.
Yeah.
As Sam mentioned, there's an altruistic part and a greed part. I mean, to just things in general. The altruistic part obviously is providing on phenomenal benefits to your family members, to your next generation, your management team, your employees, your company, your community. The other side of it is that one of the things that goes back in the history, when Lynn asked me the first question, is that a lot of the things that have been done for ESOPs from a legislative standpoint, bipartisan, have been, well, what benefits do they give? Why does the government provide enticements to companies to do ESOPs? And these aren't loopholes. These are things that have been done and all legislated out and been used for many, many years. But not to get in the weeds, if you're a C corporation, you actually have the ability, many of you in the room are probably familiar with 1031 exchanges for real estate. Most people have an understanding about 1031s. Well, if you're an ESOP company and you're a C corporation, you have the choice, it's not mandated, but you have the choice that you can do what's called a 1042 exchange. It's a process, as Kate will echo. And Sam, they did that as well,
We did it.
Oh,
as
you
a C
did?
corporation. And what it allows you is the ability to, how do I term this always, but the government is providing you the ability that you can avoid paying capital gains, state and federal,
Yeah.
on your
Legally.
transaction.
legally.
Exactly, and wouldn't do it otherwise. And if you're looking at, with federal capital gains at 20, if you're at the highest rate, state capital gains at 13.3, and you have the Obamacare tax now, you could be at a marginal rate at 33% or more on capital gains when you sell your business, and most businesses have very low basis to their company. The 1042 allows you the choice and the opportunity to implement this 1042 exchange, and to not go in the weeds about it. What you're basically getting is 90% of the proceeds of the sale go to you in your lifetime. 10%, give or take, would go to your heirs. So in other words, essentially your family would get, or your heirs would get 100% of the sale proceeds of when you did the ESOP. So obviously that's an enticement for people that don't want to pay 33+% in capital gains taxes on the sale. If you're a sub-S corporation, bad news at this point. By the way, there are bills out there now to possibly allow sub-S corporations to have the ability to do this 1042 exchange. You don't have that ability as a sub-S corporation. You still have to pay capital gains. However, to aid the corporation, if you're a sub-S corporation, and stick with me on this one, whatever percentage of your company, whether it's 30%, 50%, 100% of your company, is owned by the ESOP, Does a qualified retirement plan pay tax? It does not. So whatever portion of your company is owned by the ESOP does not pay tax. So think about that from a standpoint of repaying debt from the transaction. Once you've paid the debt off on the transaction, you have the ability that your company has a portion, or much of it, is free from paying tax. How does that help you from a competitive standpoint once you don't have the debt on the debt that you had to pay the shareholders for the sale? So you have that benefit as a sub S corporation. When you are a C corporation that's an ESOP, we all get to deduct interest, correct, when we pay on loans? But you can also deduct dividends. You can deduct your principal payments made on the ESOP as well, which you can't do that normally. You can do that with your interest. So it's all these potential tax benefits. It's that, I don't want to use the word greed, but it's a tax-driven incentive that's provided by the structure, the legislation, that provides you that opportunity of, I might do an ESOP versus a sale to a third party. So what a lot of owners look at when they look at an ESOP is, or when they look at selling to a third party, what do I get net in my pocket when this is all said and done? And so you hope to get a high multiple for your sale to an ESOP versus maybe another party, but you might also have some tax advantages that go to you as well that make that net number to your family even much higher.
Great.
It's what you keep, not what you get up front.
Thanks. Guys, I want to do two more questions really quick, because we're gonna break in about 2 or 3 minutes. Can you give us just a brief overview of administration and ongoing implementation and what someone considering an ESOP would look forward to?
Well, annually, you're going to have to prepare this participant statement that goes to your participants, and that's what Principal Financial Group, as a third-party administration firm, does, working with the plan administrator at the company. And so it's going through that whole administration process on an annual basis. So we would do that. Then you're going to have a valuation firm, who probably is the valuation firm that was the trustee's valuation firm in the transaction. Will update your value each year, which is what Kate's going through for the first time this year to get a new value. And so that's a process. And that process is going to take 4 to 5 months to get complete, because the valuation, getting your financial statements completed, now you may have a review or an audited financial statements that you didn't have in the past. That's going to take 2 to 3 months. Then the valuation firm needs that in order to complete their value. Then we need that to complete the participant statement. So it's a process at the end of the year. You're going to need somebody that can do that at your company. And you know, it's going to be similar to the 401k plan, but different.
Thank you, Kim. And finally, Kim, just talk briefly, I'm Steve, briefly about how an MSOP, the Management Stock Option, Management Stock Ownership Plan, can allow the business to transfer equity from generation to generation or to the management team.
Sure. I mentioned the Price Waterhouse study that was done years ago, where about 7% were looking at that before they did the transaction. This is what they wanted to do, was about 7%. 50% I'm going to sell to a third party. That's my perceived option. The remainder are management buyouts, selling to family in the transaction. The unique thing about an ESOP is you actually have the ability in the design with an ESOP and at the same time with what's called a management stock ownership plan. It's not an ESOP. So in other words, an ESOP, if you're an employee of the company and you meet the certain amount of hours, just like a 401k plan, how do you get vesting as you go through a year? You're part of that. You're part of that ESOP. Well, in MSOP, because what are you doing in an ESOP? When you go public, when you're a company, in Silicon Valley and you go public, you're creating a market for the stock, your equity in your business. With an ESOP, you're functionally doing the same thing. You're creating a market for the stock, not a daily market that there's a ticker and you watch the stock go up and down, but an annual valuation, as Kim mentioned. With the MSOP, what is the goal for a lot of owners out there? How do I financially get the dollars that are here, the equity in the business from where it is today to my next generation sons and daughters? How do I get that to them with as little tax as possible? There's obviously a lot of structures and a lot of work that's done to be, through gifting and through other dynamics to get that stock to the next generation. When you do the ESOP, and then in tandem with what's called a management stock ownership plan, management can be non-family management, it could be family management. is you have the ability to actually determine who's in that portion, who's in the ESOP. You can say, this person is getting this percentage of the ESOP, or this many shares, or excuse me, in the ESOP. This family member, this management person. The unique thing about that is, those are shares that they have. They can be in different forms. They can be purchased, they can be earned or granted. So the unique thing is, and there's a chart we have, which I can get to anybody afterwards, is it shows over time in an ESOP, say over the next 20 years. So let's say mom and dad are 65 and their kids are, I say kids, are 35. Well, they're not going to retire for another 25, 30 years. They want to be in the business. So what the ESOP does is, and it looks chart, and I can just kind of use my hands here because that's what it looks like, is the ESOP has this many shares when you sell, and the ESOP might have this smaller amount of shares, maybe 12%, and the ESOP's 88%. Well, over time, what happens to your employees? They leave, they retire, they go on to other things, they retire from the business. Well, your amount of outstanding shares gets smaller and smaller. So that ESOP that has that 12%, as you go forward into time, what's happening to their percentage of shares? It's going up. And if they were able to buy those shares, or they were granted to them, or they earn them in some fashion, did it cost them anything to do that? In other words, what was their cost to be able to do that? So what we've been able to do in transactions, we're now, some companies in their third generation of ESOPs, it's what I talked about a little bit earlier, where you have the ability to go where it's a liquidity event for grandma and grandpa, it's a liquidity event for their children, it's a liquidity event for their for the grandchildren eventually in the business. And is there any gift tax involved in that? No. What you're basically doing is you're providing incentive for those family members to stay there through the business. And as you go forward, as shares are redeemed back when people leave, retire, or otherwise, your share group is getting smaller. Your outstanding shares is getting smaller. So it's the example I gave at the beginning, that about 250,000, I always question that number. That seems a little high, but there's been a whole lot more ESOPs put in than there are at any one time. Probably 11 to 12,000 at any given time. That's why you have those transitions. Maybe they close out the ESOP at some point when that's been achieved. But during all of this, grandma and grandpa received a liquidity event for their equity they built in their business. Sons and daughters received liquidity or equity within the business that way, and it was able to then be passed on to that third generation. It could continue and keep going.
Thank you.
So that's kind of the dynamic, that there are a lot of structures that are created that allow you to be able to do the things that you want to do for your business.
Great, great. Let's have a hand for our panelists.